Politics Uncensored with Ali Milani and Zoe Grunewald on Fubar Radio.
Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani, and me, Zoe Grunewald. No, Zoe's not here today. She couldn't make the show today. I didn't do a Zoe voice there, I promise. I don't know why it went further high pitch, but I didn't do one, I promise, Zoe. She couldn't make the show today, but don't worry, you've got me. I'll be joined later by Professor of International Studies at the Clinton Institute in Dublin and founder of EA WorldView, Scott Lucas, to talk about the shaky ceasefire between the United States and Iran. But first, given as you got me for the next 10-15 minutes, I thought I'd take us through an overview of the war instead of the week unwrap this week. So those of you listening, our regular audiences, will know that every week we talk about the week's political talking points. But this week in Westminster, where I, for my sins, spend way too much of my time hanging around with losers with letters MP after their name, the conversation has really been that the only policy is foreign policy. And it's so much of it is dominated, so much of Westminster talk and the politics is dominated by foreign policy, with two wars, as the government will tell you, on two fronts, the Ukraine and Russia war and the United States and Israel's war on Iran. And the consequences of those wars are that they're not just international foreign policy issues, but they have serious domestic impacts as well. Anyone who's gone to fill up petrol for their car, for example, or diesel, will know and have felt that impact in the last week. I think I saw the petrol prices were I saw 157 today for petrol and about 190 for diesel. So those are direct consequences of the war, as well as energy bills. But a lot has changed. So let's just go through the timeline of where we are today as we sit. And we'll discuss a little bit about where we may go, and then we've got some interviews where we can discuss with Scott where he thinks things will go. Things move very, very quickly in a week. So last week, Donald Trump set a deadline for the Tuesday, the 7th of April. I believe it was at 8 p.m. For Iran to come to a deal before the shooting starts. That was a bad Trump impression. And that deadline was really to focus minds and to push the Iranians into some sort of ceasefire deal. It's been clear that Donald Trump and the American side have been quite keen for a ceasefire deal for a very long time now in this war. They will claim it's because they met their military objectives. Critics will say it's because this war hasn't gone to plan. My view and others' view is clearly Donald Trump and the American administration thought that this was going to be a quick war, similar to, not that it was a war, but the operation in Venezuela had gone so well and so swiftly that they figured that this was something that they could deal with quite quickly. And as that did not come to pass, there was more and more political pressure on Donald Trump to bring the war to an end, not least because of his MAGA supporters at home. Remember, Donald Trump ran on a platform of no more wars and no forever wars. And so getting caught up in yet another Middle Eastern war was a serious problem. But it seemed like the Iranians weren't much for negotiating. So as Donald Trump, clearly there were back-channel negotiations happening, but also very public signals from Donald Trump that he wanted some sort of ceasefire and political arrangement with the Iranians. The noise out of Tehran was consistently, we won't negotiate. At least not until some of their key metrics were measured, and some things that I don't think it would have been realistic that you would expect the Americans to comply with. In that context, Donald Trump set a deadline on Tuesday, the 7th of April at 8 p.m. when he said the real shooting would start if Iran didn't reach a deal. Now, on Tuesday morning, Donald Trump sent out a tweet as it appeared that ceasefire deal may not come. I'm going to read the tweet out for you, if I may. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. He said, I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary can happen. Who knows? There's a number of things to unpack in this tweet that came on Tuesday morning as it appeared that a ceasefire deal wouldn't come. First, a whole civilization will die tonight is outwardly genocidal rhetoric. The the idea that the United States would destroy an entire civilization, of which you would presume civilian populations are included, has caused enormous concern. In fact, there is a growing movement, I think largely led by the progressives in America, to invoke the 25th Amendment, which is the amendment on whether the United States president is fit for office and fit to conduct his duties. As a result, and this tweet was used as significant evidence for that. And so the threat of genocide and annihilation of an entire civilization, obviously, I don't even know if it's worth talking about international law anymore and whether we even pretend it exists, but would be a clear violation of that. But the tone of the tweet was causing great alarm. By the way, I hear Keir Starmer was on holiday when this tweet got sent out, and someone had to gently walk up to the beach and say, fella, we might be in nuclear winter by the time you get back to Holborn and St. Pancras. Anyway, so that tweet comes out on Tuesday, the 7th of April. I also want to address this consistent rhetoric that's coming out of the Trump administration about total regime change. Complete and total regime change. This idea that this war has accomplished regime change. Remember, Trump started this war by encouraging the Iranian people to take back control of their government. It might be the only chance that you have. And so there were a lot of people who, critics of the Iranian government, who thought that this would be the opportunity for complete and total regime change, as Donald Trump has called it. Well, that call has clearly not come to fruition as many had envisaged and predicted, largely because you don't get regime change without boots on the ground, and boots on the ground seemed like an enormously risky thing for Donald Trump to do. But this idea that he is now running a rhetoric that there has been total and complete regime change, let's just do a quick check. The Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Parliament in Iran, his name was Ghalibaf before this war. Today, it's still Ghalibaf. The president of Iran was Masoud Pezeshkian before the war. The president of Iran is Masoud Pezeshkian after the war. The supreme leader of Iran was Ayatollah Khamenei before the war. The supreme leader of Iran after the war is Ayatollah Khamenei Jr. So this idea that there has been complete and total regime changes is utter nonsense. But anyway, we digress. This tweet came in the context of increasing pressure on Donald Trump, and this idea that on Tuesday morning that a ceasefire deal may not come. Well, we get to that evening, Tuesday evening, and just as it seems that 8 p.m. deadline will pass. Now remember, this deadline was set for Tuesday, the 7th of April. The tweet comes out in the morning. By the evening, where it looks like that deadline may come and go, the president of Pakistan tweets, and by the way, I really enjoyed this tweet because originally, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but you can go on the tweet and look at the drafts. And the first sentence of the tweet was draft text for Pakistani PM on X. So we forgot to take that bit out. But we reached a ceasefire deal, it seems, on Tuesday evening, brokered in some way, shape, or form by through Pakistan, and that seems to be a significant development. Oil prices actually start to come down. As it seems the Iranians and the Americans have reached a 2-week ceasefire deal. Now, there's been some leaks about this deal and the conditions of the ceasefire that have been denied by the Americans. I'm just going to read them out quickly for you. So there's Iran's 10-point plan for a conditional ceasefire, which claims things like a complete cessation of the war and permanent cessation of the war in Iran, with no time limit, ending all conflicts in the region, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, establishing a protocol to ensure security and freedom of navigation, full payment of compensation for reconstruction of war costs to Iran, the full commitment to lifting sanctions on Iran, which has been a key roadblock even in the negotiations before the war, the release of Iranian funds and frozen assets held by the United States, Iran committing to not seek nuclear weapons, and the immediate ceasefire across all fronts. Now, Trump described the deal as a success for the United States. He said it's a significant proposal, it's a significant step. And the idea was that these would form the basis of negotiations for the next 2 weeks for a more permanent solution and a more permanent cessation of the war. Though both sides have now claimed victory. So Donald Trump has said that this is a total and complete victory for Washington. And the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, confirmed that Tehran may allow safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, although things have changed since then because of Israeli actions. But the Iranians have also claimed victory for that. So Tuesday evening, going into Wednesday, we have a ceasefire. Now, things have shifted, and ceasefires are usually quite messy, but Israel does cease its attacks on Tehran, but does not cease its attacks on Lebanon. And we've seen significant bombing of Beirut and other Lebanese territory over the last 24 hours, with over 100 people having been killed, including significant amounts of children. Britain has today, this morning, called the bombing of Lebanon by Israel completely wrong, totally wrong, I think, and is calling on all parties to meet the ceasefire. Now, this seems to be where the most anxiety is about whether the ceasefire will hold, because as of today, Israel is continuing its operations in Lebanon, though we did get some breaking news just as we came on air that Benjamin Netanyahu has told his cabinet to start direct talks with Lebanon. So in a statement posted on X in Hebrew, he said that in light of repeated calls from Lebanon to open direct negotiations, he will instruct his cabinet to begin talks that will focus on disarming Hezbollah and establishing peaceful relations between Israel and Lebanon. Now, Iran believes that the ceasefire deal included a ceasefire on activities and hostilities in Lebanon. America and Israel have disputed that fact, but this seems to be where there is the greatest anxiety as to whether this ceasefire will hold. Now, it's important context that ceasefires will always do have certain points of sensitivity and moments, particularly early days into a ceasefire, where different sides accuse each other of violations of that ceasefire, though this seems to be a clear violation if Lebanon was in fact part of the negotiations behind the scenes. Iran's deputy foreign minister has told the BBC, for example, that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen if the US withdraws from its aggression, but the hope seems to be that this ceasefire will hold if Israel at least holds back its attacks on Lebanon, because Iran has said that it will respond if these attacks continue. In fact, today the Iranian side have said that they were very, very close to responding overnight, but for, again, the intervention of the Pakistani authorities. Let's look now. We are over a month into this war, and I just want, now that we have that timeline of the deadline of the 7th of October, the tweet from Donald Trump in the morning, the ceasefire agreement that's reached that evening, the 10-point plan, the basis of negotiations that will go on for the next 2 weeks, and the contentions around Lebanon that continue as we are live on air. It's helpful to talk about, I think, the cost of this war, certainly in human lives. So, a report by Al Jazeera, and these numbers will shift, bear in mind, says that 2,076 people have been killed in Iran, and that's including 26,000 people injured. In Iraq, we've had 109 people killed, dozens injured. Kuwait has had 7 people killed. Bahrain, 3. Qatar, 16 injured. The UAE, 12 killed, 221 injured. Oman, 3 killed. Saudi Arabia, 2 killed. Jordan, 29 injured. Syria, 4 killed. In Palestine, 4 killed. Israel, 26 killed and 7,183 injured. And 13 US military deaths who have been killed and 200 US military injuries. And so this brings us to the idea of, while both sides claim victory, who can really say that they've won? And as with war, the real losers are the people. And while both sides, America, as you can expect with Donald Trump, has claimed total and entire victory, so have the Iranians. For the Iranians, you can imagine that, certainly for the Iranian regime, that survival was victory. And though significant damage has been done to the leadership, to infrastructure, to energy, to their military capabilities, their nuclear facilities, the Iranian regime thus far has survived. And so they will take that as victory. The United States, no doubt, will have been able to claim victory based on the damage it's done to Iranian ballistic missile program, to its nuclear facilities, though they did say that they completely obliterated that in August. So both things can't be true at the same time. what has really been accomplished? And this is where I'd like us to go in the next segment. Because as far as I can tell, nothing has been accomplished. The Iranian regime stays the same. Their ballistic missile program is still active to this day. The nuclear facilities, well, if that's the reason that you went to war, didn't Donald Trump say that he obliterated that in August? So that can't be it. The only thing that seemingly has been achieved over the last month is thousands of people have been killed. Energy sector has been completely disrupted. Our energy bills have gone up, and nothing politically has been accomplished over the last few months. So what we'll see in the next 2 weeks are clearly negotiations between the two. Both sides, as we predicted on this show, will claim victory. And unfortunately for us at home, while the Iranian regime stays intact, the Bank of England chief warns that this could trigger a 2008-style financial crisis moving forward. That's it from this sort of quasi-week unwrapped, and then we will come back and retouch some of the points that I have raised and the discussions about who has won, what the lasting impacts are, as I'll be joined by the Professor of International Studies at Clinton Institute in Dublin and the co-founder of EA WorldView, Scott Lucas. He'll be live with us to talk about some of the impacts of this war. Hello, welcome back to Politics Uncensored. It's just me, Ali Milani, in the studio today. We don't have Zoe with us, but we've just listened to a pre-recorded interview with her. Just a quick update. Keir Starmer has just said that there is more work to do on this fragile ceasefire, which we've been talking to. Bless him. It's a bit like after Man United games when I do fan cams and I pretend I was involved in the game. And he probably desperately needs this win. So we'll give it to him. Joining me now to make sense of Donald Trump, Iran, and the shaky ceasefire is Scott Lucas, friend of the show who's joined us before, Professor of International Studies at the Clinton Institute in Dublin and founder of EA WorldView. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Really easy softball question for you. Did Donald Trump lose this war?
Yeah, thank you for that easy one. Look, the starting point is that no one wins a war. Sorry to bring it down just a bit, but the reality here is, of course, that you're talking about thousands of people who will have been killed in Iran over the past 6 weeks, thousands who have been killed in Lebanon, where we also have a serious attacks ongoing even today by Israel, that you've had, of course, damage and deaths in the Gulf states. This has been an uncontained war that's taken in the entire region.
Scott, can I just interrupt? Sorry, I just want to interrupt you there because we went through the death tolls earlier in the program, but I have to correct myself because we've just had new numbers. So I said that in the last couple of days or in the last 2 days, 100 people have been killed in Lebanon. We've just got fresh numbers that say 203 people have been killed in the last sort of 48 hours with more than 1,000 wounded. So you're absolutely right on that. And these numbers seem to be growing quite exponentially, even with a ceasefire.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'll get to the Israel-Lebanon front in just a minute.
Yeah.
Because it's affecting this broader notion of ceasefire. But to get back to the issue of Donald Trump, the starting point for this is that both the Trump administration and Israel, when you had this decision on February 28th to attack, they had a plan A, which was to knock out the supreme leader, assassinate him, as well as dozens of officials and commanders. And on day one, they succeed in doing that. But then they don't plan for the regime holding out, that there are new leaders that are appointed, there are others that stay in place, and they refuse to surrender. And there's no plan B. That simply carrying out airstrike after airstrike after airstrike doesn't force that capitulation. For Israel, it was regime change. For the Trump folks, it was regime surrender to their demands. And eventually you got yourself into a situation where the Trump folks faced a choice. As much as he threatened to death to Iranian civilization, only 2 days ago, the choice was really not about expanding air attacks. It was either you have to put in ground troops to bump the regime out, or you have to go into talks. And that's why he suddenly not only accepted talks, but in a really serious error, handed the diplomatic initiative to the Iranians by saying, I'll do it on the basis of your demands, your 10 points, which forced the White House all day long yesterday to backtrack from that and say, oh, no. He agreed to a different proposal from the one that's being publicized, which wasn't true. So we've got, in other words, this uncertain outcome, even if the talks go ahead in Pakistan this
Mm.
weekend. But then I want to bring in the Israel-Lebanon dimension because that's sort of been the secondary front. It's now the primary one. Yesterday, in fact, that death toll escalated from the one that even you mentioned.
Mm.
254 people killed, including 3 journalists, by the way, 837 wounded. And what the Israelis are clearly trying to do is force the evacuation of southern Lebanon so they occupy about 15% of the country. The problem is this got so serious with the attacks that it threatened the possibility of the discussions between the US and Iran this weekend. And the Iranians effectively said, if the attacks don't stop in Lebanon, we're going to walk. We'll keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. We'll keep choking off your oil and gas, and we're not going to go into the talks. So according to a senior Trump official, the latest twist today is that Trump asked Benjamin Netanyahu to dial it back. And in the last hour, the Netanyahu office has said, okay, we're open to direct talks with Lebanon now.
Mm.
That not with Hezbollah, but with the Lebanese government.
Okay, can I ask you, I want to get to that in a second. We've got enough time to get to that, but I want to ask you first about why Donald Trump felt the need, because I think all analysts that I've seen worth their salt are agreeing with you with what you've just said, which is basically the Americans did hand the diplomatic hand to the Iranians with these negotiations, certainly with the 10-point plan, whether it's exactly what's been leaked or not, it doesn't matter. It felt like the ball was in the Iranian courts. Why was that necessary? Is that because of domestic pressures that are on Donald Trump? Is it the financial pressures of the Strait of Hormuz being closed? Because you could have imagined a world where they just left and said, total and complete victory, we're done.
Yeah. Because in the run-up to Trump's message, which was on Monday, about death to Iranian civilization, and then just before the U-turn on Tuesday, the White House was sending signals across to Iran, which is, look, open up the Strait of Hormuz. Open this. This had become their priority. So when the communication went back from Pakistan that Iran was willing to talk, the number one point on their 10 points was freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, albeit under Iranian oversight. Because what the Iranians want to do is establish a toll system for it. It looks like that Trump simply jumped at point number one and didn't think about the other 9 points, which include, for example, that Iran would get reparations, compensation for reconstruction, that Iran
lifting sanctions,
that Iran would continue to have some uranium enrichment for a civilian nuclear program while pledging not to pursue a nuclear weapon. Iran makes no statement about ballistic missiles, so it keeps those off the table. And it makes no statement about its alliances with groups like Hezbollah or like the Houthis in Yemen.
So can I ask you about this, Scott? Because I think this is really, really important. And you were absolutely right to mention about the only losers in war are the people, right? But this 10-point plan, if it's true, is better than the deal the Iranians had before the war. Because it's talking about releasing sanctions. It's about releasing frozen funds and assets that of the Iranian. Like, this is a better deal than they had before, no?
Absolutely. So they not only have survived, so they not only stay in power, despite their repression, by the way, of the Iranian people, which we were only talking about in January, they have actually gotten the Americans to, again, at least negotiate on the basis of, look, we're not going to get rid of our nuclear program entirely, despite the ultimatum you gave us 2 days before the war started. We are not going to put ballistic missiles on the table, despite the fact that you demanded this 2 days before the war started. And I think importantly, we're not going to give up control of the Strait of Hormuz. We will talk to you about a system to allow shipping to go back through here. But now, contrary before the war, because anyone could move through the Strait of Hormuz and did not need Iranian permission. Now, similar to what happened with the Suez Canal back in the 1950s, when Egypt took control of it, you now have to work with us to go through the strait. Now, this is no guarantee the Iranians will get there, because, of course, the Americans may not necessarily agree if they go into Pakistan. The talks may not even take place, but it does mean that Trump is back in a corner now, which is, if he isn't going to negotiate on the basis of what the Iranians set out, he's got to threaten to renew the attacks, to go back into those attacks on Iran. And I think that would have domestic consequences, given that a majority of Americans are against that.
Yeah. So can I ask you about you mentioned the Lebanese sort of contingent in all this. It's evident to me in the 12-day war last summer, there was a moment in which Trump kind of lost it and used profanity, I think, outside of Air Force Two, where he said they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And it was clear that he didn't have the influence that you would expect the United States to have over Israel. The same is seemingly true now on Lebanon, where they're desperately trying to get the Israelis to hop. Given that they speak like Netanyahu and Trump have said they speak every day, and there seems to be this very, very close relationship, it seems to me that the US actually can't contain Israel. Am I right or wrong?
Well, no, because they, first of all, you got two men in Netanyahu and Trump are huge egos. So neither one is going to say, like, I'm controlled by the other. Secondly, while the two sides work together, they each have their own objectives, which are slightly different. And that is that, again, Israel wanted regime change in Iran. Everybody connected with the Islamic Republic out. The U.S. was happy for regime surrender. In other words, the regime could stay in place if they agreed to American demands. So there's a bit of a difference here.
I mean, that's a fundamental difference, no?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess you would say fundamental, because when you get to the last few days, it's like, okay, if the U.S. is going to negotiate with Iran, Netanyahu doesn't get his regime change.
Yeah.
So what's the secondary position? I'm going to pursue this greater Israel. Remember, where did we get to with Gaza? He ceasefires because Trump wants it, but he's got 53% of Gaza under an indefinite occupation, and the rest of Gaza is weakened. Now, I think, let me just go ahead and just put it out there. I don't like making predictions, but I think I see where the landing point is on this. And that is that Israel will halt their attacks on Lebanon once they feel like they have control of that 15% of Lebanon where they've issued forced evacuation orders. This is south of the Litani River, which is about 30 kilometers from the border.
So the prediction is that they're going to permanently occupy that region?
Yeah. Yeah. You move out the civilians. You don't allow them back in until you have your control of it. You effectively can say to your people in Israel, we've pushed Hezbollah back from the border where they can't fire the rockets across to you. But what you're doing is whether for defensive purposes or a broader vision, you're establishing a greater Israel. That even if you were pushed to ceasefire by Trump in late 2025, finally, you got control over most of Gaza. Even if Trump really wants you to ceasefire here, you've got your 15% of Lebanon, and Trump can sweep back in and say, I'm the one that got the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and he can go back to being president of the Board of Peace.
Yeah, and last thing, we don't have much time. How much is this having, even outside of this, is this having a domestic impacts for Donald Trump? Because we've got midterms coming up.
Oh, I mean, he's down below 40% approval rating for the first time in his second term. He's around about 39.5%. Disapproval's up to 57.
But does he care? He's not running for re-election. Allegedly.
Look, well, first of all, allegedly. Yeah, we'll see what happens in 28. There's a couple things that are important, not to just Trump but the Trump camp. And that is, you want to retain control of Congress, because even if they tend to roll over to you, you can't risk that with a Democratic majority. Secondly, you look like a lame duck president who's a loser if you lose in the midterms. Third, this really dents the chances of JD Vance, who is making his own noise by supporting Hungary's Viktor Orban this week, because JD wants to be the president in 2029 who helps dismantle the European Union.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Scott. That was Scott Lucas, a friend of the show. We hope to have you back on. That's it from Politics Uncensored today. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points. You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at fubarradio.com or via the Fubar Radio app. Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.
Fubar Radio.